Go right ahead.
Hello. So we just start off with some introductions? Could you tell me your name?
I'm Ann Price. I was Ann Hutchison when I started Vanderbilt.
Also, where did you grow up?
I grew up right here in Nashville, went to Hillsborough High School.
What years did you attend Vanderbilt and for what programs?
Well, I started Vanderbilt in 1968 when I graduated from high school. I graduated from Vanderbilt in 3 years. Even though I was class of 1972, I graduated in 71. And then I came back to Vanderbilt and graduated medical school in the class of 1978.
Can you tell me a little bit about your journey to Vanderbilt? What led you to attend school here?
Well, I played a lot of sports. My brother attended Vanderbilt, and I was very fond of him. And at the time, he had gone to Georgia Tech to do a master's. He had graduated. And I really toyed with the idea of going to Georgia Tech. But after talking to him and also thinking about playing tennis in college, I really decided that Vanderbilt was the right place for me.
And then can you tell me why you chose to come to medical school at Vanderbilt again?
Well, at the time, not a lot of women were being admitted to medical school. I was very fortunate that in the class that I came into, there was quite a bump of women. Before me, there were about 3 women a year. And when I came in, I think we had 12 in my class. But my theory was that if my state school, which at the time I was living in Alabama, if they wouldn't admit me and my Vanderbilt wouldn't admit me, then I probably wouldn't get admitted. So I applied to those 2 schools. And, of course, Vanderbilt was definitely the one that I wanted to come to.
And then could you tell me how the environment on Vanderbilt's campus was compared to the environment in your hometown?
Well, of course, this is my hometown, and I felt like the Vanderbilt campus was very similar at the time. It was very similar to my high school, very similar to what I had known growing up. Although there were quite a few people who were from different regions, so that was different.
All right. Where did you live when you attended Vanderbilt? Did you have a dorm?
Well, that's an interesting story because the year that I was admitted to Vanderbilt was one of the years that they had a bump in deciding to admit more women to Vanderbilt. Before I came, there were very few women at Vanderbilt. Many of the women who aspired to go to Vanderbilt went to Peabody at that time, and those were different colleges at the time. And you could take courses at Vanderbilt when you were on Peabody's campus and vice versa. But a lot of women applied, and then a lot of women accepted, and then a lot of women accepted the invitation to come. And so many women accepted that there was no room in the dorms for everybody. So what they did was they called in all the town women and our parents and showed us that at the end of the Branscombe hallways were these lounges, and they had put 3 bunk beds in the lounges. So 6 town women could be in the lounge. And that was your option. You could either be in the lounge or you could stay and live at home. And I know my father at the time said, "Do you think it costs just the same to live in the lounge as opposed to living in a regular dorm room?" And the answer was yes. He very wisely did not make a decision for me, but he said, "Your option is you can have a car and you can live at home and go back and forth, or you can live in the lounge." And after looking at the lounge and realizing that there were no desks, no closets, no privacy, I decided I would live at home. And that's what a lot of the town women did. There just wasn't enough room.
Did you still feel like you were involved on
Oh,
campus?
very much. I was playing sports, of course, so I had my team. And then I do think that that is one reason that I went ahead and joined a sorority, because that gave me a place here on campus that really felt like home.
Also, did you have any concerns about safety on campus?
Not at all. I was here very late, studying very late in the science library, which was in Stevenson Center, and I just don't ever remember feeling unsafe.
You mentioned that a lot of women attended Peabody. Which college were you in?
I was in the arts and science at Vanderbilt. I was a chemistry major.
And were there a lot of women in the arts and science?
Yes, I mean, that was definitely the place that more women, in the year that I came in, we had more in arts and science, definitely more than in engineering, definitely.
How many women were in your class again?
I'm not quite sure in the undergrad side. I know at the time the metric that we were told that there were 3 men to 1 woman. Now, whether that is absolutely true, that is what we were told at the admissions orientation.
So did most of the women who attended Vanderbilt with you in undergrad graduate with you, or was it common for women to drop out of school when they got engaged
It
or
was
married?
very uncommon for women to drop out of school. I did marry during college, and there were several who did. It was right at the tail end of the Vietnam era. But even those who married did not drop out.
Was there any pressure in medical school to drop out?
None whatsoever. Absolutely none. Vanderbilt made it very plain that if you were admitted, they planned to help you graduate, and they were going to do everything possible to help you graduate. And I felt that way, the same way. I felt very supported in the undergraduate area, too.
And then were there any resources available for students who were suffering, whether it was like mentally or emotionally, or just adjusting to undergrad and medical school life?
Well, in thinking about that, Margaret Cunningham, who was one of the Dean of Women, she was a resource unto herself. I mean, she very much had an open door. She would allow you to come in and talk with her. We had student health, in Zerfos. All of our teams definitely had coaches who were resources. But then we also had academic advisors, typically in our major. And I know my academic advisor was a real source of strength several times when you were, especially when it was academic stress.
You mentioned Margaret Cunningham. Were you here when the Women's Center opened?
No.
Oh,
I
wow.
was here when she was here. And she was quite a paragon. I mean, she was just a very special person.
Looking back, if you were here when the Women's Center opened up, what would you think would be the impact of the Women's Center?
Well,
How
I
it
think
could
it
have
would be
helped you?
great. Just a wonderful resource. It was not something that we thought about, though, at the time.
All right. And then, do you remember how diverse your Vanderbilt class was in terms of racial and socioeconomic background?
I do remember that there was quite a diversity of socioeconomic background. There were people who were definitely struggling to be here. It was a sacrifice for their families to allow them to come. There were people who were doing military type scholarships, ROTC type scholarships in order to be able to come. And then there were people who had great wealth. I do remember that. As far as racial diversity, there was some. It was not great. Not at all like when you walk across campus today. I mean, just not at all. We were much more regional at the time. But you got to remember that at the time it was not that easy to travel. And there was no Southwest, and people tended to go to college much closer to their home. And I think that's true all over the nation, not just for Vanderbilt.
That's true. Were there any women of color in medical school?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
And they did very well and have had wonderful careers.
And then on that topic, were there any visible LGBTQIA plus individuals in medical school as well?
Yes. It's interesting because I do remember that, but everybody was treated the same, and it was much more of a treatment related to your work ethic, how hard you were working on your classes and things like that. I don't remember any differences made. They were just folded into the class as everyone else.
So you felt that Vanderbilt's campus was very accepting in its terms?
To me, I felt yes.
All right. Could you talk about your experience as a woman in your classes at Vanderbilt?
Thinking back about that, taking chemistry, many times I was either the only person, the only woman in the class, or I was one of very few, because I ended up taking what's called professional chemistry, which was a little different than pre-med type chemistry track. And when you did that, then you took differential equations and quantum mechanics and physical chemistry and things like that. And I just remember that there were very few women in the classes. But as far as how I was treated, if I was treated differently in any way, I don't think so. I think the same high standards that were expected of everyone in the class were expected of me. I wasn't given any special treatment. I wasn't in any way discriminated against as a woman. I had only one professor who taught differential equations, and he did not last long here at Vanderbilt because he did not have our collegial spirit, who was very profane. And I remember talking to him about that I didn't come to Vanderbilt to hear that kind of profanity. He was just incredibly profane. It was his first year at Vanderbilt. And he did not take that well. But I don't think he didn't take it well because I was a woman. I think he took it poorly because he was questioned that somehow this was not appropriate behavior at Vanderbilt. And I still don't think it was appropriate behavior at Vanderbilt. He did not take that well.
And then what was your experience at the medical school? Was it similar?
Very similar. In the medical school, there were enough of women that, I mean, we just folded in and worked right alongside. When I think about who my best friends from medical school, I have male best friends, I have female best friends. It was a very a very collegial type atmosphere there.
So did you have any tension, social or academic, between male and female students?
None.
None?
None that I experienced.
And then did you have any female advisors or role models in the medical school?
Yes, we did. There were several. Joanne Lynn is somebody that I very much looked up to, who was in anesthesiology. Rosemary Robertson in cardiology. And Rosemary later became the president of the American Heart Association, someone that was just a very strong faculty member at the time. But there were women who were residents, because remember, when you're in med school, then you're very influenced by the women who are residents. And I just remember very strong women residents who you looked up to and you wanted to be like them.
Did you notice any characteristics or stereotypes associated with being a typical Vanderbilt girl?
No, other than to be admitted to Vanderbilt at that time as a woman, you had to have very strong metrics. And the women who were at Vanderbilt at that time were bright. They were high achievers, leaders. They had been leaders in their high school areas. We were busy. We were very busy people and tended to get involved in lots of things and be very active on campus.
Can you talk about your involvement on campus?
Well, of course, I played tennis, and that was a very major time commitment because we traveled and we, of course, practiced every day, and that was a large commitment. Then I was in a sorority, and at the time, Vanderbilt still had a Bachelor's of Science of Nursing, and my sorority tended to have lots of nursing students in it. So that was very interesting, just wonderful group of young women to be around. And of course, many of them we also had a lot that wanted to go to medical school, and some of them became my mentors there in the sorority. So I was very involved in that. And we also had, I don't know whether they still do, but Lotus Eaters, which was one of the I don't know how to describe that, but it's sort of like Phi Beta Kappa, but it was very involved as far as having service and things like that, and those were activities that I participated in.
Mm-hmm. Did you hold any leadership positions while you were at Vanderbilt?
Well, I was captain of the tennis, and then with Lotus Cedars, I was president, and then with my sorority, I was the scholarship chairman. Now, that was an interesting leadership experience.
Could you tell me some more?
Well, scholarship chairman is in charge of making sure everybody is meeting their academic standards for the sorority and also for Vanderbilt. And we had a wonderful sorority. I mean, we won the Quiz Bowl. Okay. We were the first women's team to ever beat the men in the Vanderbilt University Quiz Bowl. So we had a strong group. But, there's always a few that try to push the envelope downwards a little bit. And we had a few that, you would have to work with to try to get their academics up, because that was part of what being scholarship chairman was about. And I just remember having a few angry calls from parents about these sort of things, and thinking that there was only so much I could do as a peer leader to improve scholarship. And it gave me a real insight into what deans and some of the academic leaders on campus must deal with on a daily basis.
And I bet that experience is very useful
It
now.
was.
Can you tell me what the attitudes of students, faculty, and administrators were in regards to your leadership roles?
I think very positive. In medical school, I was the secretary treasurer all the way through. We had, president, vice president, secretary treasurer, and I did that. And then I was also the president of AOA, which is the Phi Beta Kappa for medical school. I think very positive.
All right. Were there any active feminist groups on campus?
Some of my nursing friends in my sorority were very active. I know several of them went to Washington, took buses, went to Washington, marched on Washington. Of course, it was during Vietnam, you have to remember. But I don't remember it being so much feminist. I remember it being, we had an anti-war group on campus at the time. I think people chose the things that they wanted to support carefully, but I don't think it was so much male and female. I think it was more what the activity.
Were you involved in any of these movements?
No, at the time, I was very involved with my studies. I was very busy with studies, also with my tennis, and then also, I did end up getting married during college. But I did not feel negative at all to our country. And there was some negativism there, and I didn't sense that, and I didn't feel that. I think my family is very positive toward the military, and of course my husband went into the Marines after the lottery. There was a lottery for whether you would get drafted, and he was in the numbers that would get drafted, so he went ahead and joined the Marines. And we were just very supportive. So I didn't feel that. It was interesting because I know one of our professors of organic chemistry in particular, everybody was wearing black armbands for support, the anti-war, and everybody would wear these black armbands. And they decided there would be a moratorium on tests, and it would happen on this particular weekend. And you have to remember, we had Saturday classes at the time, and we had organic chemistry on Saturday, and we were going to take a test on that Saturday, and our professor, who later became a dean here, very kindly said he supported everybody in every way, but he was having his test, whether they wanted to come or not, but he did understand. But he was having it anyway. And then the question was, well, what would happen if you didn't come? And he said, well, you would make a 0. And it was he was very supportive in one way, but in another way, he was very, this is what's going to happen. It's just interesting. Vanderbilt did not have a lot of unrest. We had Tent City, which was out in front of Rand, which people put up these tents, sort of like Occupy Wall Street. I'm sure you've seen that, and that people put up the tents and lived out in the tents for a while. I mean, it was an interesting time. We did not have any buildings burned here on our campus. It was, I think our administration was very supportive and very, it was that same collegial atmosphere. There wasn't the tension that you see in some schools between the students and the administration. I think there was a real positive interaction there.
And that goes for the medical school as well?
Oh, very much so.
In medical school, were you ever pressured into choosing certain specialties?
No, I had really strongly thought about orthopedics. I did see that that was going to be a hard road as a woman, because I could see that that was one of the areas that was dominated by males at the time. And because it was a much longer residency, I had to think long and hard about that. But several of the orthopedists here at Vanderbilt were very positive toward me, and if you want to do this, we'll support you. I ended up going internal medicine, which was definitely one of the areas that more women went into at the time, but it wasn't because anyone shifted my focus. It was me making that decision that that was the right thing for me.
All right. Just to end on a good note, what is your favorite memory from your time spent at Vanderbilt?
Meeting my husband in Furman Hall. That's definitely, I was taking German class, and I remember when he walked in, and we never dated while we were in class together, but after German class ended, after that particular semester, we started dating, and of course, every time I walk by Furman Hall, that's a very positive memory.
All right, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
Can I ask a couple of questions before we stop? Is that okay? So, one thing that's come up in other interviews that we've done has been like restrictions in the dorms, and I'm wondering, did you experience those too?
We had.
Did you end up living in the dorms?
I didn't end up living in the dorms because it just was so easy. I had such an easy time, and I have to say that it was much easier to study at home, much easier. And we were never with the town women, with that big bump of the town women. It was not like we were going to have our first choice on dorm rooms at any time, but. You could not wear slacks in the dining hall. It was interesting because when I came in, there were all these rules, and by the time I left, there were no rules. You couldn't wear slacks. You had to dress for dinner, that sort of thing. One of the funniest ones was that you had to take phys ed. Even when you were on a varsity team, you had to take phys ed. And you had these little bloomer outfits, which, of course, even in my high school, we didn't have anything like that. And I was just appalled when I saw these little white shirts and bloomers. But you could not wear them on campus. You had to put them on when you got to Wesley Hall. Wesley, where the Wesley Garage is where the women had our gym. And when I got there, I just couldn't believe it because there was only one changing stall in the place. And, of course, we all wanted to just put the bloomers on and get over there. Well, they decided you couldn't wear them on campus. You had to put a raincoat over these. If you're going to be in your bloomers, you had to. And I would have to say, as bad as they looked, you probably wanted a raincoat. But right about that time, clear raincoats came in. And so everybody bought a clear raincoat. And so now we had clear raincoats over these bloomers. Well, the administration gave in right away. It was like, you don't have to wear a raincoat. In fact, you probably don't have to wear that set of bloomers either. You can just wear normal exercise attire. And so, like I said, there were a lot of rules that came in. There were restrictions about women in men's dorms, men in women's dorms. All those went away in the 3 years that I was here.
Were there any clothing restrictions for men on campus?
Not that I remember.
So they did not have to wear special
No,
sports?
no. It was just so funny because this PE requirement ended up tripping me up. I came in with all these credits, and this, of course, is before, we had computers, but not in the way that we have them now. And so the computer spit me out after one semester as a sophomore. But I only had one credit of PE. So this computer put me on academic probation. And, of course, I had made straight A's that first semester. And my father gets his, and my mother, gets this letter that says, your daughter's on academic probation. And, of course, when you're on academic probation, you can't do anything. Now, this is one of those situations you were asking where students who are hurting, that was hurting. And so I went right to my academic advisor, who was in chemistry at the time, showed him the letter and said, I've only been here one semester, so there's no way I could have taken 2 semesters of PE. That was why I was on academic pro. And he looked at the letter, said, I will take care of this. And within the day, my academic probation was lifted. But it was just one of those interesting times where you're in a transition with technology. And if there had been a human looking at that, they would have said, this doesn't make sense. But the computer, I didn't have 2 semesters of PE, so I was on academic pro. And that was hard because you can't play sports, you just can't do anything when you're on academic probation. And that was all lifted. And the reason I was able to graduate in 3 years was coming in with all those credits from AP courses.
Oh, okay, so they were from AP.
I came in with 21 credits, I think.
Okay.
So.
And that allowed you to graduate within 3 years?
Uh-huh.
That was the one thing I wanted to ask.
Okay.